It's interesting. There are a few topics out there that ruffle as many feathers and provoke as much emotional reactivity as the topic of limits and genes. The previous video had, I wouldn't even call them criticisms, emotional outbursts without any explanation as to what people meant. Lots of people talking about human will and spirit, but without defining what those are or where they come from. And there's no doubt in my mind that essentially when it comes to these things, really genes, limitations, what humans can achieve as individuals and what they can't, this really is a sacred cow. This is a universal sacred cow. Because you would think in an audience such as mine that the people here would be accustomed to this sort of thing and wouldn't cling to certain mystical beliefs such as human will and spirit, where, again, this is never defined, nor is the origin defined. But what I want to address today is this notion of defeatism in the context of the so-called black pill. That's all just nihilism and defeatism, which is rank nonsense. But this, again, is just reflective of the way YouTube works. Very few people actually listen to what people say in their videos, and this includes my videos. People hear what they want to hear. They don't listen to the words. And so, for example, I don't know how many times I've stated in that video and in the past that you should make an effort, that it's worth improving yourself, that these things are warranted. The difference is, unlike a lot of people, I will add some caveats there. I'm never going to claim that the sky is the limit. I say it's important to work on yourself. It's important to try to improve. It's important to make an effort. You have to make some kind of effort. But don't be surprised if your efforts amount to very little or not, because not everyone has the same ability to achieve. Instead, people want to hear some kind of emotional tale, how everyone can achieve everything no matter what they do. They just need to will it to happen and quote-unquote put in the effort. It's like the guy I mentioned in the previous video. I showed him 2 studies and could have showed him more, and he said, despite all that, I'm going to believe in the blank slate no matter what. If you want to have an unfalsifiable belief and continually preach it, that's fine, but I'm going to ignore it until you have data, for me, explaining what will is, what spirit is, where they come from, and how these things are somehow independent of the genetic and environmental factors that created you. I'm not going to listen to you. Anyway, that's not entirely what this video is about. I want to put things in perspective. So let's start with the concept of the beginner in anything. Let's take an example that's very obvious, very visceral. Let's take a guy who has never really been very physically active. He's been very overweight to morbidly obese with some middling success of weight loss here and there. Unless you're a moron, you wouldn't tell that guy to get up and start running for 2 hours nonstop. One, is doubtful he could even manage a 2-hour run because he probably would collapse from cardiovascular failure way before that. And even if he could, he would destroy his knees in the process because of his massive weight. It's well known that people who are very, very overweight probably shouldn't be running. They should be doing more low-impact cardio. And in general, it would be a really, really bad idea to tell him to do something that only very fit, slimmer individuals can do. And you might say, Stardust, that's obvious. But is it? Because this is a perfect instance of human limitations and what's possible and what's not. If he literally never moves, you might tell him to take a brisk walk for 30 to 40 minutes, which will in itself be very challenging to him, but not nearly as challenging to other people. Why? Because it's obvious. They have different levels of fitness, different levels of adipose tissue, blah, blah, blah. The same is true of everything you want to do. You have to start somewhere. Everyone recognizes this. If you've never done something before, you're going to have to start as a beginner. And everyone recognizes that. But that is a limitation. It's just that a lot of people like to pretend that there are no limitations beyond that. And my main contention here is that the sky's the limit mentality is ultimately destructive and harmful. Let's take another concrete example. Let's say you're some young guy and you want to improve your body, go to the gym. You see a guy like Chris Bumstead, the current reigning Mr. Olympia of classic physique. Guy is 6'2", has amazing structure. Let's set aside the narcotics that he takes, because he would still have amazing structure and height even then. And the guy looks at that and thinks that that's reasonable and attainable. Over time, of course, he will train and discover that it's very unlikely that he has the same genetics as Chris Bumstead, and his results compared to him might end up being piss poor. Do you think it's then motivating to look at somebody like that and think, wow, I barely look like I lift after 2 or 3 years? Probably not. So at the end of the day, this is about gauging what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. From youth onwards, especially for the older generations, we were sold a pack of lies. We were told that anything is possible and you can do anything you want as long as you put your mind to it. Now, it might be that on some level, people need these hokey delusions preached to them in order to keep them content. And again, if you look at the visceral reactions some people have, not a lot of people, but some people have in the comment section, every time I talk about genes and environment and human limitation, as if these things were made up but not their magical spirit that they keep on talking about, or will. All of this is said in the service of not discouraging people from trying or making an effort, but rather allowing them to perceive things for how they actually are. That you might make an effort, but the results might not be as stupendous and amazing as the results you see in other people. And that's okay. The problem is then, and let's refer back to that example of the guy who sees Chris Bumstead and is inspired by him, supposedly, is that the guy might have put in 2 or 3 years of hard work in the gym, ate right, slept right, and still looks like he barely lifts because his genetics are crap, and people will come in and tell him that he has done nothing and hasn't worked hard at all, and that he's been doing everything wrong. This is the problem with using other examples of people who are far outside the norm as outliers. And indeed, this is the problem with comparison. Lord Petey the Punani Slayer always likes to say comparison is the thief of joy, and that's absolutely true to a degree, but we exist in a state of comparison. You only know how good and proficient you are at something by comparing yourself to others. Where does this ultimately leave us? The sad truth is that yes, we have to compare, but comparisons are never fair because everyone is different from you, literally everyone, apart from your identical twin, in which case that wouldn't apply. So again, the idea is not lie down and rot and do nothing. The idea is do what you can, do what you think might correspond with your best, but if you don't look like Chris Bumstead and aren't a millionaire, despite trying hard, it's not a question of fault. And people that point a finger at you for not being the grand exception to the many rules that exist out there that show that most people don't achieve X, Y, Z, well, that's okay. This is about having a balanced perspective about what humans are capable of and not capable of. And there are people repeatedly, not just in my audience, but broadly in the culture at large, the majority in fact, that want to stick to magical thinking, refuse tooth and nail to accept reality, to accept a shred of data, and even the notion that spirit and human will comes from your personality, and guess what? You didn't create your personality. So I would say, make an effort, try. It's important. But be aware that although these things are perhaps necessary, they are not enough. Effort and trying are not enough. You also need the gifts that you may or may not have to capitalize on those efforts and those attempts. And if you don't have them, then you need to make some sort of personal calculation. Years ago, for example, I decided to not pursue art anymore as a teenager because I realized I was decent at it, maybe slightly above average, but there were people that just blew me out of the water. And I stopped enjoying it as a result and decided it would not be a worthwhile effort. And so this is ultimately all up to you. If, for example, you like going to the gym just because of the way it makes you feel, despite not making amazing gains, that's fine. But be prepared for people who know nothing about your own genetics to tell you how you're not training right, how you're not eating right, how you're not doing X, Y, and Z right, because they blew up like monsters because they chose different parents. It's just that simple. You have to make that personal calculation. Is it worth it or is it not? But first, of course, you have to make an effort and try. But effort and trying are never enough. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient, despite what many of the naysayers might claim. We are all different, and we all end up with different results. Being aware of this can spare you massive amounts of disappointment, pain, and discontent, whereas the ideology of you can do anything and you can achieve anything no matter what, and there are no limitations because of the magical human spirit that resides in all of us, that comes from nowhere apparently, is completely detached from your genes and environment, I guarantee you that's going to set you up for much more disappointment and pain than anything that I've ever said. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. You guys are the best, absolutely essential for the channel. You have my everlasting gratitude, as well as my donors on PayPal. Thank you very much indeed. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, be much appreciated. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.